Good morning. I am going to shut off my phone, which on the backside says, The Ohio State University. You do not have to shut your phone off. If it rings, don't be embarrassed. That's fine. Go ahead and answer it. This is a very leisurely sort of atmosphere, and we want you to feel free to get up if you need to and go out. We want you to feel free to get up and stand up if you need to, if you're struggling with back problems or maybe getting a little sleepy. If you didn't get enough sleep last night, you feel free to just navigate the morning however you would like to. I just am extremely appreciative for the fact that you're here. I think that speaks volumes of you, that you would expose yourself to a discussion about some things that's not typically described or perceived as real pleasant or positive. But it's really important that we talk about this stuff. A merry heart is good like medicine, Proverbs 17:22. In light of that, let's begin with a little levity. Here's a good prayer. Maybe you prayed it this morning before you got up out of bed. So far today, God, I've done pretty good. I haven't gossiped. I haven't lost my temper. I haven't been greedy, grumpy, nasty, selfish, or overindulgent. I'm very thankful for that, Lord. But in a few minutes, I'm fixing to get up out of bed. And from then on, I'm going to need a lot of help. Please be with me. Amen. This obviously was written by a man. Before I got married, I didn't even know there was a wrong way to put milk in the refrigerator. Marriage is a great education. This had to come from a woman. I just burned 2,000 calories. That's the last time I ever leave brownies in the oven while I take a nap. The reason I'm old and wise is because God protected me when I was young and stupid. Why does a rooster crow so early in the morning? By the way, I have a neighbor that's a rooster, and that rooster does not crow just in the morning. It crows anytime it wants to in a 24-hour period. Why does a rooster crow so early in the morning? To get a word in before the hens wake up. Oh. Well, Rick got in real trouble on his silver wedding anniversary. He forgot. His wife got really angry at the end of the day. And she stomped upstairs that night and said, tomorrow, after me living with you for a quarter of a century, fixing your meals, taking care of the home, taking care of all the kids, tomorrow, I expect a gift in the driveway. A gift that's red and goes from 0 to 200 miles in less than 6 seconds, and it better be there. Well, they didn't sleep in the same room that night. The next morning, she got up, she looked outside the upstairs bedroom window, and there was a red box out there with white ribbon. She excitedly ran down the steps. She went out there, and she opened the box. Inside of it was a set of red bathroom scales that went from 0 to 200 in less than 6 seconds. And Rick has not been found since that day. Oh, I'll tell you what, it's such a blessing to be married. I was able to enjoy that experience for 41 years. We got married way too early. We were 19 years, both of us were 19 years old. I do not recommend that to anybody. That is kind of digging a hole for yourself that it takes a few years to dig out of when it comes to practical and financial things. But we survived those early years and enjoyed 41 years together. Not having a cherished blessing like that any longer is an extremely difficult set of circumstances to live with and to try to live a meaningful life after a loss like that. So I want us to focus some attention, not entirely on the widowed, because I think that as we go through this morning, what you'll see is actually this kind of a workshop is a great thing for everybody. The unmarried, the not yet married, the married, the widowed, those who've lost children, those who have lost parents. It's valuable to everybody. But these next couple of sessions focus not entirely, but primarily on the experience of losing a spouse. My wife was born September 22, 1952, in a hospital in Dover, Ohio, which is about an hour south of Cleveland, Ohio. We were married for 41 years. I finished my freshman year at Freed-Hardeman College at the time and did not want to live 750 miles away from the girlfriend that I had come to know and love very much anymore. So we decided to get hitched and live on love. And that's about all that we had for those first few years. We were blessed with 3 daughters. And those 3 daughters are all faithful children of God. 2 of them are married, and 1 is fixing to be married on June the 24th. They were raised right. Their shirts in the lower right-hand corner say God first, then family, then the Ohio State University Buckeyes. 1 lives in Smyrna, Tennessee, which is between Nashville and Murfreesboro, just off of I-24. She attends the Laverne, Tennessee Church of Christ, which is the congregation that oversees the Widowhood Workshop ministry. I have a daughter who lives 10 minutes away from me in Villa Rica, Georgia, which is 40 miles west of Atlanta. Please keep her in your prayers. She's the church secretary. If you don't know this, church secretaries need extra prayer. Katie would, I think, agree with that. And then the 3rd daughter I have lives in Gainesville, Florida. And the one in Gainesville, Florida, the one in Villa Rica, Georgia, are both married. Both of their husbands are deacons in the Lord's church. The one in Smyrna, Tennessee is going to be getting married to a man named David Miller. She's going to reclaim her maiden name on June the 24th. But I'm really proud of those young ladies. As a matter of fact, the Widowhood Workshop Ministry is not all about me. It is a family passion project. That's what we call it. It's a family passion project. Every member of the family is on the board of directors. It's what I call my family. They're the board of directors for the Widowhood Workshop Ministry. There are 3 daughters, 2 sons-in-law. There's going to be an additional son-in-law come on board here in June. And then I have 5 grandchildren. And all of them are active participants in various ways in contributing to the Widowhood Workshop Ministry. It is not my ministry. It is my family's passion project. 5 grandchildren, and this picture was taken a few months after my wife passed away. That's where she is buried in Tuscarawas County, about an hour south of Cleveland, Ohio. Can you imagine laying in a bed and in that hospital bed in your home, a little grandchild of yours put in bed with you, but you do not have the ability to raise your arms and hug that child? Parkinson's disease is a tough struggle. There's no return to normal like there are with some other diseases. There's just a decline in function. It's just a matter of how steep the decline is. For my wife, it was 8.5 years. That's a fast decline for a Parkinson's patient. Most Parkinson's patients can live 20, even 30 plus years after their diagnosis, and they don't die of Parkinson's disease. My wife was an exceptional case. She only lasted 8.5 years, and Parkinson's disease did take her life. In July of 2013, the doctor took me out of a hospital room into the hall and basically explained to me that it was not an emergency situation. But he said in a few months, what's going to happen is the Parkinson's disease is going to get up into your wife's respiratory system, and she's going to quit breathing. That was July of 2013. She passed away at 9:40 in the morning on December 25 of 2013. Our oldest daughter was on her left side, and I was on her right side, and we watched her breathe her last breath. Those 8.5 years were extremely stressful. She lost the ability to get up out of a chair by herself. She had to start using a walker. She fell using that walker on occasion. One time she fell out of bed and broke a hip and had to have a hip joint replacement surgery. She got to the point where she couldn't walk at all. She gradually lost her voice. You know how hard it is to take care of somebody who cannot communicate to you in words? You talk about frustrating, aggravating, not at her, about the circumstances, wanting to know what she's trying to communicate, but yet only being able to read her eyes, which is very subjective. She lost the ability to feed herself. She lost the ability to eat. It was a tough struggle. She died Christmas morning of 2013. About 2 to 3 weeks after she passed away, I was sitting at home in an empty house, just me there. And I had an experience I've never had any other time in my life. I said something out loud spontaneously. What is wrong with me? That's what I said. What is wrong with me? I was a mess. I knew I was a mess, but I had a real hard time figuring that out. Now, I say that as one who, previous to that night, for years, had studied a lot about death and dying and grief. I say that as a person who taught a lot of classes about that kind of subject. I say that as one who had read a lot of books about dealing with the troubles and trials of life. In my library, if you were to look at my library, if you were to look at topical books, without doubt, I have more books on that particular topic of dealing with the troubles and trials of life than any other topic in my library. But I was a mess. I was really struggling, wondering what is wrong with me. So what I did was, I did what any normal human being would do in our contemporary time. I went to the internet and I started searching about help for widows and widowers. And you know what I found? Virtually nothing. Especially when I tried to do searches in faith-based communities of any sort. You know what was there? Zilch. I thought, man, somebody ought to do something. And that was the conceptual birth of the Widowhood Workshop Ministry. I think there are two areas in our culture and even in the church where we've really missed the boat. One is in caring for caregivers. You know what it's like to be a caregiver? That's one thing that I thought there really needs to be more done to help us learn about how to effectively help caregivers. Now, I was blessed to be in a wonderful church family. I was a minister in that church for exactly, literally, 1/3 of a century, 33 1/3 years. It was between the 31 and 32 year time frame that she passed away. I was blessed with a great church family that was of help to me as a caregiver. And even with that help, there were times, and you're going to hear about this tomorrow morning, if you come, I am going to preach at you, but only in worship. There was a time during that experience that I thought I was going to snap. Caregiving was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. As much as I hate widowhood, and I do, I hate it. Caregiving was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. I thought, man, somebody needs to help us understand about caregiving and learn how to help people who are caregivers. And I just thought, I can't go there. Now, fortunately, maybe by the providence of God, I found a man, Ron McQuinn, who is the recovery minister at the University City Church of Christ in Gainesville, Florida, who is going to be starting a ministry of that very nature, where it's going to be a ministry that's going to focus on helping us understand about caregiving, because he did the same thing. He had a wife who was afflicted with a form of genetic dementia that just really gets a hold of a person and just brings them down really quick. And his wife passed away in her 50s from dementia in a very swift amount of time. And he has a heart for this Widowhood Workshop ministry, and we're going to work together to help him to have a ministry helping caregivers especially. But my family bought into this, and we decided we wanted to be the ones to really highlight widowhood and the loss of a spouse. I don't know of anybody else in the Brotherhood who's doing this, this widowhood kind of ministry. In addition to having these workshops, which you could read about in that paper that was distributed to you, it gives you little details about the Widowhood Workshop ministry. But in addition to that, we help churches start local ongoing widowhood ministries. As a matter of fact, if you want to, you can go to censusreporter.org. You can plug in Summerville, South Carolina, and you can find out what percentage of females and what percentage of males are widowed in your town. By the way, your percentage is a tad high, but you can do your own homework on that. If I have time, maybe in the second session, I'll share with you what that number is. But that's what the Widowhood Workshop Ministry is about and why it came about. What we're going to talk about in this session, and the next session as well, is about this state of a person who has lost their marital mate by death. It's not the only way to lose your marriage. If you were here yesterday at either one of the sessions, you know a divorce is another way to lose your marriage. And don't ever underestimate the tremendous struggle and the trial that comes with going through the divorce experience and living with that reality in your life. Do not underestimate that. We are a minority. Those of us who are widowed are a significant minority, only 6% of the total population. But if you look at the 65 and older group, the percentage is way higher. 37% of the women 65 years and older are widowed. That's well over a third. 12% of the men. Now, I wonder who's ministering to these people. Now, if you drop that number to 55, the 55 and older group, when she's first widowed in this country, is 57. Now, to drive that number down that low, now that's not the median age, that's the average age, is 57. To drive that, when you think about so many people losing their spouses, females losing their spouses in their 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, to drive that average number down to 57, what are you going to have? A lot of women, a lot younger, to drive that number down to 57. Some of the most inspiring people that I have met in this ministry are young ladies in their 20s and 30s who've lost their husbands. They're amazing. Buffy, who lives in southwest Georgia, teaches at a faith-based school. And she called her husband every day at lunchtime. This one day, she talked to her husband, and when she hung up, she was concerned. She decides immediately to get in the car, but it's a 45-minute commute for her to go home. On the way home, she calls her dad, who's a law enforcement officer, and says, "Dad, would you go to the house? I'm concerned about him." When her father got to the house, he had taken his life. Buffy was in her 20s, and they had a child a little over a year old. Brittany in West Tennessee had a husband, Bradford, who was driving in Trenton, Tennessee, and had a terrible auto accident. She becomes widowed after about 1,300 days of being married. I know how long she was married because after Bradford died in that accident, she created a blog where she journaled and wrote and shared publicly about her journey of loss. I can tell you about Brene, who a couple of Thanksgivings ago, her husband was in a patrol car in a high-speed chase. The car ended up in a culvert ditch. He died a few days later. Brene is one of the people who is in a private Facebook group I have of members of the Churches of Christ who have lost their spouse. And in that group, there are over 250 people. And they range in age from their 20s to 90 plus. They're all Christians, and they're helping and supporting and encouraging one another. You don't have to be old to lose your spouse. As a matter of fact, the day you say, I do, is the day you become a prospective widowed person. Now, I never thought about that as a 19-year-old when I said I do, nor does anybody else, I think. Think about that when they say I do. But it happens. Statistically, 75% of all married women, 75% of all married women in our country are going to experience widowhood. Now, you can tell, statistically, you've got a heavy emphasis on females, much less highlighting males. There's a reason for that. There are two reasons. One is the man's fault, the other is the woman's fault. Okay. Women live longer than men. The lifespan of a female is longer than a male. Guys, it's our fault. We take so good care of them that they live longer than we do. Okay? That's one factor. Okay, now another factor is, this is the fault of the female gender. Another fault is, statistically, women typically marry men who are older than they are. That's all on you women. That's your choice. I don't know why that is, but statistically, the vast majority of women marry men who happen to be older than they are. You see, what you've done with those two facts is you've created this obvious likelihood there's going to be way more females widowed than there are males. Total number in our country, in the neighborhood of 20 million. 20 million. Every year in our country, there are over 1 million married people who experience the loss of their spouse. 6% of them are under 44 years old. Do you think that it might be a good idea for us to maybe have some classes about marriage that include the experience of widowhood? I think it's interesting, and these are things I never thought about until I lost my wife. You know, we have these marriage enrichment programs that, pop up in the Brotherhood, and they're all great. I've never heard of one that was not really good. My wife and I attended 2 Carl Burkeen, Paul Faulkner marriage enrichment seminars. Awesome. I mean, they were great. There used to be a marriage encounter that was done by the Catholic Church, I think, primarily. But we have all kinds of marriage seminars and marriage classes and all that sort of thing. Do you think that is a complete experience if you ignore the transition from going from married to widowed? Because that is a part of marriage. See, there's a beginning and there's an end. I believe in premarital counseling. I believe in that so strongly that I will not officiate at any wedding ceremony unless the couple is willing to go through a pretty arduous premarital counseling experience with me, which includes book reading, classwork, personal discussion with the 3 of us together after they independently do their premarital counseling reading and homework. I think it's really important, not because it totally prepares a person for marriage, but it helps with the transition from being single to being married. Now, if you believe in that concept, what are we doing to help married people transition from being married to being widowed? I'm not suggesting that it's going to totally prepare you. I am suggesting it's going to help you a lot. At least you're going to be a little bit better prepared for the experience. You know, we're talking about a whole bunch of women and some men who are struggling mightily with a tremendous challenge. Obviously, most of the books that have been written about this are written by women. There are a few on the table display. You can see a few written by men. H. Norman Wright is one who wrote very well about his grieving as a male spouse left behind. And there's a couple of others up there. By the way, I have written 2 books. I mentioned this. I will not push this heavy. But I've written 2 books on this subject because I felt like there was a need for more material about this subject written by people who were Christians. This is the first book I wrote. And by the way, both of them are small books for a purpose. I did not want to write one book about this subject and scare away what I call non-reader people. We're losing a lot of our reading culture. So I wanted to write books that were small, less intimidating by appearance. They even have 13-point type in them to make it easier to read. This is the first book I wrote, When the End Comes. And then this book here is called Before the End Comes. The one I'm writing now is After the End Comes. I'm hoping to have it available at the end of July. But these books are available here. You can get them through Amazon. If you do Kindle, you can get them for $5 in a Kindle version on Amazon. But these are available here if you would like. This one's $8. This one's $9. But I thought it was very important to get this kind of material out, especially we need to do this kind of thing in the brotherhood. In the church, we need to be helping as a church family. We need to be helping one another with this particular challenge of this transition. Can you imagine this? 245 million women. In National Geographic, this particular issue, February of 2017, has an article in it about widowed females in India. If you want your heart touched, maybe even crushed, read this article. I cannot believe that human beings on the face of the earth in 2017 could be written about like you read in this article. I wonder if we are helping our missionaries who are doing foreign work with ministering to the widowed. One of the things I'm most proud about in regard to the Widowhood Workshop Ministry is there's a young man named Joseph Ishant in Ghana who we have helped start a widowhood ministry in Ghana. Already, he's had 2 baptisms from that ministry. I am super proud of that young man. A part of pure religion, and we're going to be talking about that in a little bit, is ministering to the widowed. And with all of the widowed people in the world, by the way, in China has the most, India has the second most. In China, you're talking about 44 million widowed females. In India, I think it's 43.4 million widowed in India who are females. There's a lot of great work, compassionate ministry that we can do in this area in the entire world. Now, God describes himself as a defender, a reliever, and a protector of the widowed. Now, what does that tell you about God and the widowed? Hey, Lynn, would you come up here for a minute? While we're talking about this, Lynn is going to be passing out something in the way of a little gift to you. Every family that's represented here, and there's some more when you need more. But I'd like for each family to receive one of these notepads. When you think about God describing him in this fashion, what does that tell you about God and the widowed? Anybody? He has the best interest at heart for them. Okay? Anything else? He has their best interest at heart. What else? Compassionate. God has a compassionate heart. Let me ask you this. Does he know about what's going on in their life? Oh, yes. He's omniscient. He knows. There's nothing hidden from the Lord, right? Now, let me ask you a question, and think about this, reflect about this in your personal life. Have you ever yourself or known of other people who were aware of somebody's plight but didn't do anything about it? You can nod your head this way. Yeah, sometimes we know about a person's plight, but we don't do anything to assist them. Now, that's one option. Do you know people who know about other people's plight and really it doesn't affect them? It really doesn't matter to them. They don't care. They really don't actively care. Now, do you know of people who don't know about the plight of somebody else, and because of that, they didn't help them? That's where a lot of us fall, in that category. We don't know about what's going on in somebody's life, so what are we doing to help them? But why are we not helping them? We don't know. If we don't know about what somebody's going through, if we don't have any comprehension of the heaviness of their burden or the nature of their struggle, even if we have a compassionate heart, we are not going to minister to them because we're ignorant. Let me confess to you, as a preacher in a local church for decades, I neglected the widowed. I did their spouses' funerals. I was a lot of times with them when they suffered loss. And I saw them crying. I heard their cries. We held hands. We hugged. We prayed. What I learned by those experiences is I learned how awful loss was. What I was totally ignorant of was life after the loss. That's what I didn't know about. But I got on the fast track in a big learning curve when my wife passed away. And then I started reading some of these books written by other people who were living after their losses. And I thought, whoa, I really missed the boat. That second or third week after my wife passed away, for the first time, I sat down with a church directory and a yellow pad and a pen, and I flipped through the directory and I started writing the name of every widowed person in the church there. I'd never done that before. This was 32 years into the ministry with that church. I'm ashamed to admit this. Marlene was there. Frank was there. Lillian was there. Then there was Dean Miller. I was number 12. There were 8 females. I was the 4th male. And I started thinking, I had no idea, until now, I had no idea what it was like, what they had been going through living with their loss. I thought, how in the world did I miss the boat? That's why I am convinced that local churches need to become more aware of loss, and especially spousal loss. And if you want to know something about the uniqueness of spousal loss, after the break, come back for the second session. It is what I would consider the most important session in a widowhood workshop, because it gives you a chance to visit in the head and the heart of a widowed person, and it's a hard place to be. God knows the feelings, the thoughts, the circumstances. He's a defender, a reliever, and protector. Now the question is, how does God do that? Tell me, how does God do that? Anybody have a suggestion? Through his people. Now, let me also preface through his word. Through his word, there is a tremendous amount of defense, relief, protection. but through his people. Do you know the song, he has no hands but our hands to do his work today? He has no feet but our feet. We're God's defenders, protectors, and relievers, his people, his body, his children. We're his huggers. If you want to help a person sense the presence of God in their life when they're so troubled, you be God's representative in their presence. And that will help them. You being a brother or sister in the Lord, or a caring neighbor, or a loving family member. We need to know about this so that we can effectively help with this. In the Psalm, the wicked are described as among those who might slay the widow. You know, Job was accused of a lot of things by his friends, a lot of wild accusations made against him. One of them said of him, Job, if you're suffering the way you are, and they believed in the theory of retribution, if you were suffering because you were sinning. If you were suffering a lot, then what would that say about your sinning? You'd sinned a lot. Okay, now, he was suffering a lot. One of the things he was accused of is having the gall to send widows away empty. Now, I dare say that that accusation is probably not true. But that goes to show you about that ancient perspective about the widowed. In Deuteronomy chapter 24, there is an interesting section of Scripture. And let me just give the background before I read a section of Deuteronomy 24. They are about to go into the land of Canaan. Moses is going to die. But before he dies, he's got some really important things to share with the people as they cross the Jordan, go into the promised land, and take over from those barbaric people the promised land. What I find interesting is Moses does not gather them together to talk to them about military strategy. He talks to them about who God wants them to be and how God wants them to behave. Starting in verse 17. You shall not pervert justice due the stranger or the fatherless, nor take a widow's garment as a pledge. 3 life circumstances there. Stranger or foreigner, depending on your translation. Fatherless or orphaned, depending on your translation. Stranger, fatherless, widow. Now, those are 3 life circumstances. What is common about those 3 life circumstances? Disadvantaged, okay? They are in a uniquely difficult life circumstance, aren't they? What does God want done? Well, he says, you shall not pervert justice, do those 3 kinds of people. But you shall remember that you were a slave in Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you from there. Therefore, I command you to do this thing. When you reap your harvest in your field and forget a sheaf in the field, you shall not go back and get it. It shall be for the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow, that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. When you beat your olive trees, you shall not go over the boughs again. It shall be for the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. When you gather the grapes of your vineyard, you shall not glean it afterward. It shall be for the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. And you shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. Therefore, I command you to do this thing. Twice, he says, I want you to take care of these disadvantaged people. And the reason that I have for you taking care of these disadvantaged people, your motivation is when you were in Egypt and you were slaves and you were crying out to me for help, I heard your cries. I responded to your affliction. I compassionately and miraculously released you from bondage. Now you go out and be compassionate to others who are struggling with difficult life circumstances. Twice, he reminds them, remember when you were slaves in Egypt. In our neighborhoods, in our church families, in our biological families, we have people who are struggling. We need to be God's protectors, God's relievers, God's huggers. In Isaiah chapter 1, God has Isaiah go to his people and just rip them up one side and down the other for the mess that they had made of the Jewish religion. Now, they would offer their sacrifices and observe their feasts and festivals and all that kind of stuff. But you know what they didn't do? They didn't take care of disadvantaged people. And it ticked God off. He sent Isaiah to get in their face. Look, for instance, verse 12 beginning of Isaiah 1. When you come before me, who has required this from your hand to trample my courts? Bring no more futile sacrifices. Incense is an abomination to me. The new moons and Sabbaths, the calling of assemblies. I cannot endure the iniquity of the sacred meeting. Your new moons and your appointed feasts my soul hates. They are a trouble to me. I'm weary of bearing them. You spread out your hands. I will hide my eyes from you. Even though you make many prayers, I will not hear. Your hands are full of blood. Wash yourselves, make yourselves clean. Put away the evil of your doings from before my eyes. Cease to do evil, learn to do good. Seek justice, rebuke the oppressor, defend the fatherless, plead for the widow. Verse 21 says, how the faithful city has become a harlot. It is full of justice. Righteousness lodged in it, but now murderers. Your silver has become dross, your wine mixed with water. Your princes are rebellious and companions of thieves. Everyone loves a bribe. Reminds me of Washington, D.C. And follows after rewards. They do not defend the fatherless, nor does the cause of the widow come before them. Let me make a contemporary application. Y'all are coming to Bible class and worship service. Never miss a beat. What about your life outside the church building? What about your relationships? What about your interaction with other people in your life who are struggling? Are you ministering compassionately to them? Widowed people, anybody who's in a disadvantaged, difficult life circumstance, is close to the heart of God. Among them are widowed people who have gone through an agonizing loss and are struggling with what may likely be the most difficult life circumstance they will ever experience in their life. But if we don't know what it's like, we'll never help them. Can you imagine Jewish leaders even being accused by Jesus of devouring widows' houses? Frankly, I'm not sure what that is. I just know it ain't good. Obviously, they were not taking care of the widowed. In Acts chapter 6 and verse 1, we read about the neglect of the widowed, and God didn't let it continue. He made it a point through the apostles to make sure that that issue was addressed. And by the way, can you imagine, now this is a pretty good-sized church here, but can you imagine a church of maybe 20,000? Brother Wayne Jackson has written a book, a commentary on the book of Acts, where at this point, one thing that he conjectures is, from reading those first 5 chapters and seeing some of the numbers and some of the descriptions of the growth of the church, you're probably talking about somewhere in the neighborhood of 20,000 Christians, and they're all still in Jerusalem. And it says, the number of the disciples was multiplying, and there arose a complaint against the Hebrews by the Hellenists because their widows were neglected in the daily distribution. Now, I want to ask you this. If you had 20,000 people together, do you think you're going to have some problems? Especially if a lot of that 20,000 came there not knowing they were going to stay a lot longer than they had planned. They came for the Pentecost, for the celebration. They end up staying a lot longer. Do you think you're going to have a lot of ministry issues, a lot of difficult stresses with that situation? But of all the things that could have been brought up as ministry weaknesses in the first century church, it's this one that's in our Bible. I think that's interesting, especially in light of what you read in the Old Testament as well as in the Gospels about God's special concern for the widowed. It wasn't something that was to go on. It was something that needed to stop. It needed to be addressed. Pure and undefiled religion. I'm sure you've heard this verse a million times. A lot of times it is quoted to encourage us to visit other people and to start visitation programs and get organized visitation started. But look at this verse for a minute. Let me ask you to revisit this verse. The topic is pure and undefiled religion. Now, in whose opinion? You know, human beings are somewhat like dogs in one respect. We have as many notions as dogs have fleas. So, in whose notion are we talking about in this verse? In regard to pure and undefiled religion, in whose view? In God's view. Is this. Now, there are two verbs in this verse. What are the two verbs? Visit is one. Keep is the other. Okay? What's the object of the second verb? Ourselves. Keep yourselves unspotted from the world. Keep oneself unspotted from the world. Now, in light of the holiness of God, that makes total sense, doesn't it? Isaiah chapter 6, Isaiah has this awesome, when I read Isaiah 6, I think what a great thing that must have been to see and hear what Isaiah did. He was impressed with how holy, holy, holy God was. It just seems natural that, yes, God would want us to keep ourselves unspotted from the world. Now, there's another verb. Now, verbs a lot of times have objects. What are the objects of the first verb? Orphans and widows. Now, what have we done in the brotherhood to visit? Oh, by the way, we need to look at something here. That word visit is a word that has to do with looking over, overseeing, checking out the circumstances for the purpose of addressing needs. That's what that word is about, to visit the orphans and the widows. Now, what have we done with children, at-risk children in the brotherhood to minister to them? We have children's homes, don't we? Not only all over the country, a lot of places where we have mission works. In foreign countries, we establish there children's homes to minister to these children who are at risk. Now, that's the first object. What about the second object? Ministering to the widowed. What have we done in comparison to or contrast to what we've done to help kids at risk? Do you see my point? That's why I think we really need to start in our local communities widowhood ministries, to minister to those in our church family first, but also to reach out to the community, to people who are experiencing life after loss. The longest verse in the Bible that I know of about the widowed is in 1 Timothy chapter 5. And I want to point something out here that frankly I missed for decades in my life. In 1 Timothy chapter 5, it says beginning at verse 3, honor, and by the way, the Greek word there, honor, is in the present tense, and the idea of that word is care for. Honor in the sense of care for. Honor widows who are really widows. Some translations say widows indeed. By the way, the word widow in the New Testament comes from a Greek word that means robbed or forsaken. Robbed or forsaken. What have they been robbed or forsaken of? A spouse, the blessing of marriage. Now, who these really widows are, I think is explained in the next verse. But if any widow has children or grandchildren, let them first learn to show piety at home and to repay their parents, for this is good and acceptable before God. The really widows, or widows indeed, are those who don't have family members to care for them. The first line of ministry for the widowed is not the church. It's the family. If any widow has children or grandchildren, let them first learn to show piety at home and to repay their parents. Verse 16 of that chapter says, if any believing man or woman has widows, let them relieve them, and do not let the church be burdened, that it may relieve those who are really widows. Now, in the church, what do we have in the church to help parents minister to their children as they're raising their children? What do we do in a lot of local churches? We have youth ministries. We don't have youth ministries for the church to raise the kids. We have youth ministries to help the parents with the tremendous challenge of raising their children in a very chaotic and a very sinful world. My suggestion is, I think every church ought to also have a good bit of education about widowhood and instruction, and create a ministry to help families minister to their widowed, because it is a tremendous challenge. Let me tell you about my failure in regard to my own mother. My dad, prior to a major surgery, I had my mother and my wife dismissed, and I wanted to spend some time privately with Dad. And I said, Dad, I know you're worried. I know this is going to be an extremely stressful time for Mom. I know you've been stressing about this pre-op. I said, Dad, I want you to know if something happens to you, I will make sure that Mom is taken care of. I promise you that. I said, Dad, if you live, it'll be grace. If you die, it'll be glory. I said, either way, Dad, you're going to win. And I said, I'll take care of Mom if something happens. Well, he lived through that surgery, but he died a few years later. I tried to live faithful to that commitment. I lived 50 minutes away from where my mom lived, and if she needed a ride to the doctor or somebody to go with her to the doctor, I was there. When she got the checkbook messed up, needed help with finances or a big purchase, I was there. I went down every week. I mowed her yard. She had the best looking yard of any person on her road, and I was proud of that. As a borderline OCD, recovering control freak person, I was really proud of that fact. We were sitting together in her rehab room after she had an orthopedic surgery one time. And I'm the second of 4 boys. And she said, totally random, the second of 4 boys, she said, I wish I would have had a daughter. You know, that's one of the few times in my life God blessed me with self-control and I kept my mouth shut. Because internally, my first response to that was, Mom, what am I, chopped liver? I'm here. You know, that's kind of how I felt initially. But I kept my mouth shut. I gathered my thoughts. And here's how I responded. Very sincerely, totally genuine. I said, Mom, I wished you would have had a daughter too. To this day, I'm very proud of myself for saying that. I don't know what in the world came over me that I could say something so perfect at the moment. Because that's actually the way I felt. For years in my life, I felt like I'd been ripped off because I never had a sister. And then it dawned on me, I had a whole boatload of sisters in the church, and I didn't have to live with them through puberty. So I was really blessed with all kinds of sisters. But seriously, I did miss the fact I didn't have a sister growing up. I understand what she meant by that. Females are gifted by God to be more nurturing. You ladies value friendships and relationships far better. You're more socially skilled to cultivate relationships. Us guys can be good at it. We just got to work really hard at it. Guys, there's no excuse. We may be clods, but we can work on this, and we can get good at this but it just takes a lot more effort on our part. But I understood what Mom was saying. Do you know what my mom needed? More than help with the checkbook, more than somebody to take her to the doctor, more than even to have the best landscaping of any person on her road, she needed me. I didn't realize that until after my wife died. That's when I learned how critically important it was to have these relationships and people in your life. The typical widowed person who loses their spouse loses 75% of their social network. They don't know what to do with us. We make other people feel uncomfortable. They don't know what to talk about. They don't know what to do. And they don't want to do something bad, so they back away. And so we lose a lot of that social network. But that's exactly what we need to make sure doesn't happen in people's lives. We need to be willing to do what we can do to be of help. I think W.E. Vine is right about this passage in 1 Timothy 5. There's kind of an intimation here that apparently even in the first century there were people who were kind of pushing their responsibility off on the church. Parents sometimes can do that with their kids, with these youth ministries. There's no excuse for that. First and foremost, parents raise children. Churches ought to help. First and foremost, our families, the children and grandchildren, need to be ministering to the widowed, and the church needs to be helping. One verse out of that 1 Timothy 5 passage that I misapplied for years is this one in verse 8. Now, I want to remind you that everything prior to verse 8 is about widows and widowers. After verse 8, everything is about the widowed. Now, here's verse 8. If anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. I always quoted that verse to encourage guys to quit being lazy, get a job, and provide for their family. That is an appropriate secondary application. That's not the primary application. But if any does not provide for his own what? In the context, his own widowed. His widowed father or grandfather, widowed mother or grandmother. He has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. In the context, that's what's being talked about. So what are we doing relative to ministering to the widowed?